Welcome to Murfreesboro Storytellers, a bicentennial celebration. I'm your host, John Hood. Our city is celebrating its 200th birthday, and each month of this over a year-long celebration has a theme to showcase everything that's made Murfreesboro so special. As we begin winding down our bicentennial celebration, this month's show looks at our stories. And our guests today are Dan Whittle, newspaper columnist and author, native of Canalou, Missouri. Dan, welcome.
Thank you.
Elma McKnight, a native of Murfreesboro, teacher at Irma Siegel School in the Murfreesboro City School Systems. Welcome, Elma.
Thank you.
And thirdly, John Lodl, director of the Rutherford County Archives. John, good to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you all three for joining us as we talk about our stories and a part of what's made Murfreesboro such a wonderful place in which to live. Elma, you're a native of Murfreesboro, as I said. You grew up here. Tell us about the Murfreesboro that you remember growing up as to what we have today.
Well, I grew up on State Street. If people are familiar with the Scales Funeral Home, we lived in that parking lot right beside there for a long time. And when we were growing up, my mother always said we were born within the shadow of the town square because we could literally walk to the square without about 3 blocks from that. And when I think about Murfreesboro and the downtown area and how vibrant it was when I was a little girl, and going shopping down for Easter and Christmas at Goldstein's and running over to Brown's to get your shoes because you had to have stride-right shoes.
Oh, yeah.
And but I guess my best memory was one Christmas it was snowing like you wouldn't believe, and that's odd for Murfreesboro. But we were downtown, and it was getting close to closing time, and I remember hearing the chimes being played from the courthouse, and the clock actually worked back then. You know, we had a while when it didn't.
Right.
But that's probably one of my fondest memories of being just shopping in downtown Murfreesboro.
You mentioned Brown's Shoe Store. Do you remember the sales that Brown's Shoe Store used to have twice a year?
Yes, I do. We always made those sales.
You could go in before the sale and try on the shoes, but you couldn't buy them till the morning of, right?
Yeah, he was a good guy in there, and I certainly remember wearing a lot of those stride-right shoes.
And I remember the Forsham shoes from Brown's Shoe Store. Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Those are wonderful days, and still wonderful days in the
are.
Murfreesboro today.
Yes. So it's good to see it being revitalized, you know, to bring it back to life.
Tell me about teaching in the Murfreesboro City School System. What are the challenges for you there?
Well, I have taught for over 30 years in the Murfreesboro City School System, and things have changed dramatically for educators, as you know, with our latest hint from the legislature that things needed to change. So the evaluation process, I guess, is the major issue for every educator in the state of Tennessee. So it's had us, I think, change our focus, which is unfortunate, from the children sort of to ourselves, thinking about, you know, what's in this for me. And certainly when your job is on the line based on what goes on in the classroom every day, it keeps you on your toes and, you know, just kind of sets things a little bit on edge at times.
Well, good. John Lodl, we didn't mention Bradley Academy, which is right around the corner from where Elma grew up.
It makes me think of a story, because when I was director of Bradley Academy, and that would have been, I got to date myself, 2003, 2004, I was there for over a year. Mrs. Lord was still with us.
Myrtle Lord.
Myrtle Lord.
Wonderful.
And of course everybody knew Miss Lord. But she would come quite frequently to the museum to visit. It was one of her passions. Of course, she went to school there, taught there, so it was near and dear to her heart. But one day she came in, and I was cleaning up in the old classroom there, and she came in and sat down. She goes, I remember teaching. I don't know if it was that specific classroom.
It was.
I think, okay, that's right, it was. And she sat down at the desk, and I sat down as a student, and I said, Mrs. Lord, what was teaching like here? And she said, a lot different than today, when you're getting back to today's legislation that's passed. And she said, back then, she said, we had a rocking chair in the room. Said, you were the teacher and the mama. And she said, if the child got sick, there was nobody at home to send them home to, so you rocked them and taught at the same time. And she said, after school, if you had a problem with one of the students, you went home to see what was going on in the house. She goes, you went into the house.
As a teacher?
As a teacher, you walked that I shouldn't use the word troubled student, but student with may have an issue or two. You would go home with that student and see what's going on at home. You walked into the house and talked to those parents. Of course, you probably knew them.
Yeah.
and made sure everything was all right at home so that student could exceed at the classroom. And that's a huge element that's not there today.
No.
Yeah. It's just
Before
different.
Bradley was African-American school, it had a history that goes back to President James K. Polk, doesn't it?
It goes back 200 years, you know, 1809, before the city of Murfreesboro was founded in 1811, we had a school in this county named Bradley Academy. Now, it wasn't in town. The town wasn't here.
Sure.
But quickly moved to the town after Murfreesboro formed. And before the Civil War, it was an elite white male school, preparatory school,
Right.
preparing young white men for college. And that was the nature of the times. During the war, the building was abandoned, became dilapidated because of the war, and after the war, specifically about 1884, was given to the African American community. And after the war, kept that history for until the 1950s.
Well, did Polk actually attend school there?
For 1 year, he was here in 1815, and probably was the time that he met his wife, Sarah Childress, who later became Sarah Childress Polk.
And that's the great connection of James K. Polk to Murfreesboro.
That's the great connection. Of course, you know, Murfreesboro was the capital of the state for several years, late 18 teens and the 1820s, and that's when he would have come back out of college from North Carolina back over here doing his politicking in the state before he ran off to become president.
And for the lack of $75 or $100 to transfer the records back here, we would have been the permanent capital.
We would have been. And actually, the Capitol would have been across from where Bradley Museum is now. It wouldn't have been where the courthouse square is. It was the block right across from where Bradley Museum is. Kind of interesting piece of history. That's on an old map.
Well, Dan Whittle, we mentioned, is a Missouri native and has been in Murfreesboro and Rutherford County for a number of years. Noted newspaper columnist and author. Dan, you've picked up some stories along the way about our community, I know.
Tennessee, compared to Missouri, has preserved its history. I love living in Tennessee, and Murfreesboro has done it well, so I compliment these people here because they're proud of their history and heritage and have preserved it. One of the biggest stories I think I've done that went international was a man named Bo McNeely, a resident of Murfreesboro. He was the personal mechanic to Amelia Earhart, and he came to town through Tommy Smith. And Bo was after Amelia Earhart's fateful flight that she disappeared in the Pacific. Tommy introduced Bo to Mrs. Bell, the widow of publisher Bell at the Daily News Journal. And Tommy Smith launched that courtship, and Bo lived here until his death in 1993. And I asked Bo, all your accomplishments, he only gave one interview to the media, and that was me. I was very honored to do it.
Very good.
And I asked him, I said, well, Bo, he was 90 at the time. I said, one regret in life, do you have any regrets? And he said, I'm sorry that I wasn't on the airplane with Amelia. He said, I've always felt like I could have done something to make it successful. And so a very interesting man.
I'm sure. You have a story about Las Casas, is it a courting wall?
Courting wall, old Las Casas High School, a sweet story. Linda and Buddy Brown, the former owners
from Murfreesboro for a moment here, but
yeah, and but Las Casas, it's a sweet story. The charm is that Linda and Buddy Brown's dad, Ben Brown, ran Brown's Grocery in Las Casas, and Ben and Buddy and Linda were sweethearts at Las Casas Elementary School in 2nd grade. And Buddy would sneak in the store and steal candy kisses out of his dad's store, go hide it in the rock wall for Linda. When she'd come out at recess, she'd find those candy kisses and everything. Ended up marrying that boy, and how he paid for that ring, he proposed to her at the drive-in here in Murfreesboro. And how he paid for that ring was he sold his hogs.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but anyway, but I love stories like that. That's real life.
At the drive-in theater?
At the drive-in theater.
Was that the Starlight or the 4 lane?
It was Starlight.
Starlight drive-in
Yeah,
theater.
and, but anyway, that's the courting wall. And I talked to Larry E. Stewart, you know, the famous bridge man out of Las Casas yesterday. He verified the courting wall. He said that's what it was known as.
Dan, I remember, did you live homeless for a while?
Yes, I did, as a matter of fact. In the mid-'80s, I made some investments right when the interest rates went up to 20% and 21%. And so I wasn't smart enough for that line of work, and I came to Murfreesboro in 1988 as a feature writer for the Daily News Journal, and moving to Murfreesboro and Smyrna has been the biggest blessing, one of the biggest blessings of my life. It's quite a community. And but homeless can happen to any family. I'm asked to speak about that once in a while. It's a very emotional subject for me. But Murfreesboro has been so good to me and my family and spoiled me rotten, and so I'm thankful to be here.
Very good. Elma, we mentioned about Bradley Academy. You didn't go to school at Bradley?
No, I didn't. My dad went there.
Your dad went there, okay.
And my grandmother.
All right.
And she always told me they felt like they were privileged. John and I have had a relationship from Bradley Academy, and he's helped me do a lot of research on my family. But she always told us, she says, we were the Manny girls. And that didn't have any significance to me until I got much older. And I said, oh, okay, the Manny girls. So they actually went to private school when they were younger. They called it Miss Dilsey's school here in Murfreesboro, and then went to Bradley. My oldest brother, Byron Motley, actually started at Bradley, but we were too young, and when they opened the new Bradley, that's where we went. But it's a funny thing because we lived right there, so our backyard backed up to the, I guess, the playground for Bradley Academy, and then it was a funeral home, and then T90 Scales lived right there. So he had a son who's my age, Bob Scales, and when the kids would come out for recess, we would actually go out and sit on the fence and watch them play. And I know this sounds crazy, but at the time, T90 had hogs in the back of you could still have animals in the city at that time. So he had hogs, and we were too short to really sit and look over the fence. So we'd climb on top of the little pig house, and we'd watch the kids come out at playtime. But no, I was too young to go to Bradley Academy.
Tell us more about your family history that you've researched.
Well, we actually found out, my grandmother had always told me that her grandfather, David Manny, was a blacksmith at the at Oakland's, at the Manny Plantation. But they had no documentation, just the stories they've told throughout history. So with John's help, and I think Bryn Martin out at MTSU, we actually verified that, and the fact that his son, Luke Manny, my great-grandfather, also a blacksmith, and fought in, was it the Spanish-American War, I believe. But anyway, they've documented that, and we've established ties back to the Manny Plantation. And what was it, a couple of years ago, John, when they did the permanent exhibit at Oakland's mansion that featured my family there.
Oh, wonderful.
So we have close ties.
I didn't realize that connection with Oakland and your family then.
Yeah, it's a little-known piece, a significant little-known piece of American, Murfreesboro and American history. Because there were several people in the community it's been about 3 or 4 years, I believe, I can't remember, maybe 2 years, I can't remember, that, folks at Oakland's, folks in the community started saying, Oakland's has been there, one of our, it is our historic house museum in the city, and it's been there since 1960, and we all know that story, how it was given for $1 for the ladies of Oakland's to save the old house, and the plantation's gone, but we have the house, thank goodness. But what was missing was the African-American story. And not missing because it was simply left behind, but because it was not documented. There was no records, no clear records, no pictures of that plantation, the work life of all those enslaved folks. And so some of us got together and said, let's change it, let's do an exhibit. Not only it talks about slavery, but talks about what happened after the war, and way after the war, up to 1930. So we worked with Bradley Academy. Elma McKnight's a descendant of one of those former slaves of Oakland's. Of course, we worked with Oakland's and the board there. We worked with MTSU, Dr. Bryn Martin, who teaches the museum studies class in the graduate program over there. And through about a year of research, we realized that Dr. Manny, although he had the plantation here, he had 2,000 acres down in Mississippi. He had at any given time between 1840 to 1860, 200, 250 enslaved African Americans, like a lot of folks did in this area. And so specifically what we termed the Manny slaves, they really tell a story of staying in Murfreesboro. When Elma said that they were the Manny girls, that came with status, that they were associated with that plantation. Just like when we say Oakland's today, we relate to this wonderful, this amazing place. So it's an interesting story. We were able to trace, of 250 enslaved people that we know by number, we were able to piece the lives back together, about 50 to 100 of those folks. And they became doctors and lawyers and preachers and helped build the city after the Civil War. So it's a fascinating story.
When I first came here in '88, one of the first stories I was privileged to do was with T90 scales. And I researched the
One of my
racial...
playmates growing up, by the
Really?
way.
And one of my, I love history, and I was very interested in the race relation era in the 50s and the 60s and how Murfreesboro adjusted well ahead of a lot of America in race relations. And the famous T90 saying was, learn, baby, learn, instead of burn, baby, burn. And I'll never forget that. And T90 Scales was a treasure in our community.
And he, as much as anybody or more than anybody, was largely responsible for us never having any race relations problems.
What a remarkable credit to a remarkable man.
Oh, I agree. What a remarkable family.
Yes, yeah.
But the city of Murfreesboro, I think, has always been progressive, because I remembered I was involved. I attended Holloway High School.
I was going to ask you if you attended Holloway.
I did, only 1 year, but his wife, Mary Scales, an educator herself,
Oh, yes.
said to us, they're going to finally close that high school. She says, why don't you guys go ahead and go to Central, and you'll already be set up and in place there. And of course we did, her son and I and several others, not many. But anyway, we did go to Central, but we had allowed, or the community had allowed or accepted the integration piece before mandatory desegregation came
Yes, that's true.
in 1968. So my class, the class of '68, was the last class to graduate from Holloway before they closed it.
All right.
So that's an interesting piece. And living next door to T90, you know, we were very active in that first campaign of his. We were working the polls, we were passing out flyers, doing everything, you know, to get him elected. But that was probably one of the best things that ever happened to
Absolutely.
Murfreesboro, like
Absolutely.
you say, in terms of race relations.
I mentioned him being one of my playmates. I lived on Manny Avenue, where my father ran a service station and was also in the grocery business, and then later served with him on the Murfreesboro City School Board. And what a wonderful gentleman.
Yes.
I was going to ask you about Holloway. I wasn't sure whether you went back that far or not, but one of my favorite stories was about Tommy Lee, who was the quarterback for Holloway High School football. I'm not sure of the year. I guess it was back in the early 30s, and he was the quarterback, and the favorite signal was 1, 2, 3, throw it to Tommy Lee, 8, 9, 10, around right in, hike. And then they also had another young gentleman that played there whose name was Robert Vaughn, and that call was high diddle diddle, old Vaughn up the middle, hike. And those are the two signals they had. Anybody standing on the sidelines, I don't think we had bleachers, could hear those signals and knew what was going to happen. And as I recall, there used to be the Mid-State Colored Fair at that same place.
Absolutely. Every year that was a big deal. Social life in the black community revolved around the Patterson Park, as well as in the churches. So each year we'd come, and I mean, it was a huge fair, according to the times.
It was.
But they would open up Holloway, and they'd have exhibits in there, and women would bring their pies to be judged, the canning. The farmers would bring their animals in, and they'd even have some concessions going on the ground and little rides for the kids to do. But it was a big deal back then, and it all centered around Holloway and the Patterson Park community right in that area. So
it was a big event. You're right.
It was.
I'm not sure the last year that was held, but
I'm
it was
not
quite
either,
an event.
but I was a little girl.
John, in talking earlier, you mentioned about the Bottoms and some work you're doing on the Bottoms area of the community. Talk about the 6th Ward and the 3rd Ward.
The younger folks don't know the 6th Ward, 3rd Ward, or the Bottoms, but I did a lot of research about African Americans in Murfreesboro after the Civil War, and what we found out was that African Americans, if we think of American history, and we all know the story of segregation and then later integration, we want to think African Americans as having one community, say in Murfreesboro, and white folks have another community. And of course, there's nobody else, it was just white and black back in the day, according to our recollections. But what I was able to discover is that African Americans specifically didn't have one community within this small city of Murfreesboro. They actually had 3. And African Americans really related to where in the city they lived. So the wards of the city were the voting wards. This comes about 1870 or so, maybe a little before. They split the city into these 6 wards, voting wards. 6th Ward was the area right here where we are, where Patterson Community Center is today. But before this, there was Holloway High School, Bradley Academy. Most of the African American churches were right there in 6th Ward. 3rd Ward was over in front of Oakland's Historic House Museum, historic African American section over there that we can still see remnants of today. And then the Bottoms is where Broad Street is today. The Bottoms was basically Broad Street area from, say, West Main down to Church Street, a little beyond. So these 3 communities. I was once talking to a gentleman who has since passed away, Mr. Aaron Wade. And Aaron Wade was talking to me one day about growing up in Murfreesboro. And Mr. Wade was, not to date him, he's passed, but he was born in the 19-teens, I believe, around 1918 or so, I can't really remember. But he said growing up that you really were linked to a ward. And he grew up in 6th Ward, he had friends in 3rd Ward, and he had friends in the Bottoms. And one day as he was talking about this, I said, Mr. Wade, where did everybody else live? You said you lived in 6th Ward and you had friends in 3rd Ward and the Bottoms. I said, where did everybody else live? And he said, they must have lived in Murfreesboro. But you got to think Murfreesboro was so small, but there was still a lot of separation.
Dan, what's your favorite story about Murfreesboro since you've come here?
The heritage. In fact, there's some people think, John, you and me covered the Civil War. We go back quite a ways. But the heritage, the classiness, and the compassion that's still here, we're still a good neighbor village. And you put a fire burnout family on the front page of the newspaper, we help. We don't ask color, we don't ask Christian or non-Christian, we help. And that's what I love about this community, and that heritage has been that way all through life. Getting back to T90 Scales, John, he stopped a bus of protesters on the edge of the city and probably stopped a major riot. And that's when he first used the phrase, we don't burn, baby, burn here. We learn, baby, learn.
That was part of the Freedom Rides. I mean, national story.
Yeah,
he stopped the Freedom Ride bus at the edge of town to say.
And it's that kind of heritage I am so proud of. And this lady brings up the classy history of our community and everything. And it really saddens me now because Murfreesboro's got some publicity nationally. Yes. That's not positive, but that's not our community here. We are a very positive community here.
That's a very good description of us, I think. Yeah, very good. Yeah, Elma, tell us other recollections you have of growing up in Murfreesboro.
Well, I grew up during segregation, so that's not a pretty story, but it is our story.
It is a part of our history.
But I remember saving money to go to the Princess Theater downtown to see a movie. But at that time, if you were black...
Where did you sit?
You sat in the balcony after going to the side door. And, but you know what? They figured out later on that those were the best seats in the theater. Because after the integration piece came in, all of a sudden the balcony was the place to be. And that's where most of the whites sat at the time.
So you knew it all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody else had to figure it out.
Even though it had that stigma attached to it.
And if you were taking a date, it was a good place to sit.
It was. Out of the line, everything. It was good. It was good. And the other thing was going to school, because I did go to school at Bradley on Mercury. You know, it has morphed into so many different things, but it was an elementary school, grades 1 through 8 at the time. And I remember Mrs. E.G. Roberts was our principal.
Wonderful lady.
And you know how kids will be kids. She kept that school immaculately clean. And somebody had made the mistake of writing on a wall. And she had called us all into an assembly. You know, that's when kids could have assembly times then. And she says, I have a problem. Someone has written on the walls of our schools. And she said, and I just want you to know that a fool's name is like his face, always seen in a public place.
Oh my goodness.
So then she had the 8th graders with buckets of water, and they had to go and wash those walls down, because she would have none of that in her school. But,
I bet that's the last time the wall was written on as well.
You better believe it.
What a wonderful lady. She was on the city school board too for a time. I enjoyed serving with her there.
We have a lot of music heritage here too, John. The Cajun man, Jimmy C. Newman, is from here, country music. Your son's a big-time television stage producer and worldwide acclaim, Gary. The music industry and MTSU has greatly impacted this community. And that's a history that people don't pay a lot of attention to.
The recording industry management program, the whole mass communications.
It's known all over the world now.
Issue
and
is just
I have business once in a while in Missouri, and they have a great journalism school at the University of Missouri in Columbia.
Yes.
They ask me about the mass comm program at MTSU.
Wonderful.
When I go there, yeah.
That's an interesting note to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're so proud of that. Yeah. John, other recollections you have about your work and your research? You're an MTSU graduate, both undergraduate and graduate,
Exactly.
Right?
I did my undergraduate actually in music and recording industry, and then came back and got a master's in history with emphasis in museums and archives. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of fun. You know, I stick my nose too much in the records, but that's fun. I'm not originally from here. I've been here 18 years, came to MTSU and one of the ones that never left. But what's fun is to walk around town with the knowledge from the records, be it from the archives or the museums. And when you walk around town today, it's almost like parts of town you can step back in time. Like you walk down East Main Street and you know the folks that lived in the houses, they're no longer there. Or you can almost imagine the James K. Polk Hotel, which was gone by way before I got to town, but I can still see it because I've seen the pictures and I've read about it.
Well, I was at Murfreesboro Bank and Trust Company when we acquired the James K. Polk Hotel to move off the square. Tried to convert it into a bank, and if you will, thank goodness it didn't work. So we built a building for a bank, but we were criticized for destroying that ancient old building. It really dated back to 1927, I believe.
27, yeah.
And one of its greatest claims was that that was where General MacArthur and Mrs. MacArthur freshened up when they came back in 1951.
Liza Minnelli's grandparents were from Murfreesboro, Judy Garland.
Judy Garland, right, the Gum family.
The Gum family.
Judy Gum,
and
she was.
You probably can relate that story better than I, but that house that they lived on East Main still stands here in Murfreesboro.
Correct. And there's a house on Lodl Street also that traces back to the family.
And we invited Liza to come through the Chamber of Commerce one time while she was in Nashville, but it didn't work out.
She wasn't able to make it.
I wish she would. She's got very shapely legs.
I'm glad to know that. Well, we thank you all very much for being with us, for sharing the stories of our history and our past for the city of Murfreesboro during our bicentennial. So it's been great. Any final thoughts you have as we close out the program? You're just a delight to listen to.
I just always told my children, my son lives in Boston, and I told him, I said, if anything happens to me and you're the one who's my caregiver, I said, don't bury me in Boston. You bring me back here and plant me in Murfreesboro soil. This is where I want to be.
Good, thank you.
This community has spoiled me and been very gracious to me and my family, and has embraced my writing career, and I'm very thankful to live here.
Well, you've been a great asset to the community. It's just great to have you.
Yes,
John,
I love Murfreesboro because it's so progressive, but we have a strong link to history.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, we appreciate John Lodl, Dan Whittle, Elma McKnight for being with us here on Our Stories, a part of the history of the bicentennial celebration for Murfreesboro. Next month, we'll continue to look at the early days of Murfreesboro as the bicentennial theme is about our work. Please take a moment to participate in and enjoy the many activities scheduled for our bicentennial celebration. For more information, call our Parks and Recreation Department at 890-5333 or visit our website, www.murfreesborotn.gov. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next month for another episode of Murfreesboro Storytellers.